He was the man in black paint riding silver Mustang trailers across western landscapes, speaking in clipped syllables as the loyal companion to a masked lawman. Yet behind the feathered headband and stylized kimosabe lay a far more complex story, one of athletic triumph, Hollywood typecasting, cultural prejudice, and quiet activism. His name was Jay Silverheels, born Harold Smith on a Six Nations reserve in Canada. And today we peel back the celluloid curtain to reveal the real life of the actor who played Tonto. Section 1. From Mohawk Reservation to Hollywood's doorstep, Harold Smith entered the world on June 26, 1912, in Ohsweken, Ontario, the sixth of 8 children in a tight-knit Mohawk family. His childhood unfolded amid farms and woodlands, where Ojibwe trade paths and Iroquois longhouses marked a landscape steeped in tradition. His given name, Eales, meaning tree that sits close to the water, foreshadowed a man who would bridge cultures. In a small rural school, he was one of few Native children forced by Canadian policy into English-only instruction, his mother's Mohawk tongue punished as inferior. Yet at home, the stories of Great Peacemaker, the matriarchal clan mothers, and the lacrosse spirit games kept heritage alive. As a teenager, Harold found his calling on the lacrosse field. Towering over opponents at 6 feet 2, he mastered stick handling and broken stick poke shots that bewildered rival defenses. By the late 1930s, he was playing professionally for Buffalo's Iroquois Indians and later the National Lacrosse League's Rochester Iroquois. Nicknamed Silverheels for his speed on the turf, he electrified crowds, earning praise in Sports Illustrated articles that lauded his power and finesse. Lacrosse, the medicine game, taught him discipline, teamwork, and the art of silent communication, skills he'd soon translate to another kind of staged. Hollywood scout for authenticity saw Silverheels' athleticism in a 1940 newsreel about Native sports exhibitions. 20th Century Fox signed him in 1941, billing him first as Harry Smith, then Jay Silverheels to evoke a wilder frontier mystique. His earliest screen parts were often nameless braves or shout-why extras in two reel westerns. Producers leaned into his exotic presence, loose buckskin, painted cheeks, war club props, yet refused to cast a single Aboriginal character with nuance. Silverheels absorbed the indignity, noting in rare interviews that Hollywood's Indian was either savage or noble sidekick, never a man with a soul. During World War II, Silverheels served in the Canadian Army's Army-run reforestation units, planting trees for lumber and training in bush warfare. Those years honed survival instincts and a stoic humility that marked his later demeanor. Returning to Los Angeles in 1946, he took studio busing roles while studying acting at the Pasadena Playhouse. He appeared in small features, Red Dawn Trail, 1950, A Man Alone, 1955, gradually expanding his range beyond stoic appearances. Still, the roles remained rigid: Arrowhead, Geronimo, Running Deer, names repeating the same template. All of that changed in 1950 when Desilu Productions cast Jay Silverheels as Tonto in the pilot for The Lone Ranger. The masked hero already existed in radio dramas, but on-screen chemistry hinged on a memorable sidekick. Silverheels lobbied for cultural input: a single eagle feather, an eagle feather fan his mother had made, and a simple not to signify clan affiliation. He insisted Tonto never use the futuristic lingo of other Hollywood Indians. Desilu producers acquiesced, perhaps seeking authenticity to offset earlier caricatures, and Tonto emerged as the Lone Ranger's steadfast companion, a silent partner whose wisdom often guided the masked man. The series premiered in September 1949, and audiences instantly latched onto the dynamic. Clayton Moore's mask and Silverheels' expressive eyes created a visual shorthand for justice and loyalty. Viewers tuned in to hear Clayton's rallying cry, "Hi-yo, Silver!" Yet, even as Tonto's popularity soared, fans imitating his broken English, buying toy tomahawks, plastering cereal boxes with his image, Silverheels received no residuals. His contract paid $1,000 per episode, but syndication royalties belonged exclusively to studio coffers. Meanwhile, manufacturers sold millions of Ranger and Tonto lunchboxes and cap guns bearing Silverheels' likeness, yet he saw none of those profits. Behind the scenes, Silverheels found solace in the camaraderie of fellow Native actors who gathered weekly at union halls to discuss rights and representation. He quietly built relationships with wounded knee survivors, arranged film set petitions to employ Native extras under fair wages, and lobbied the Screen Actors Guild to establish a minority liaison committee. Yet these efforts unfolded behind closed doors. In public, he remained Tonto, ever smiling and barely speaking beyond his trademark Kimo Sabe, a Shawnee phrase meaning faithful friend. As the series ran through 1957, Jay Silverheels endured physical strain. He performed many of his own horse stunts, and the weight of his fringed buckskin and boots took a toll on his knees. Catching bullets, fake or real, became routine, and early TV's tight schedules meant 13-episode shoots in 17 days. He once fractured a collarbone when his horse reared, but returned to filming after a 2-week hiatus, fearing loss of his role. Despite these risks, he accrued no on-screen credit beyond the opening titles. Announcers always emphasized new character, Tonto, never Jay Silverheels. As the cultural tides turned in the 1960s, The Lone Ranger entered syndication, reaching international audiences. In Latin America and Europe, Silverheels received fan mail addressed simply Tonto, the TV Indian. Tour promoters booked him into cowboy expos in Rio, Paris, and Sydney. Yet again, no foreign residuals flowed to him, only honorariums that barely covered airfare. He joked in a 1963 interview, "I help sell millions of toy guns, but my bank account doesn't grow a feather." Behind the stoicism, the indignities stung. He shared unrecorded confidences with journalists. "Every time I speak up, they remind me I'm lucky to have a job." His genteel smile masked frustration at Western scripts that cast Native Americans as savages until Silverheels rode in. He endured racial slurs on studio backlots and segregated seating at Hollywood premieres. Yet he persisted, believing that Tonto's visibility, however packaged, could plant seeds of respect for Native cultures in young viewers. As Section 1 draws to a close, we see Jay Silverheels as a man caught between two worlds: the traditional Mohawk life he left behind and Hollywood's reductive stage. He built his career on a role that both uplifted and confined him, earning fame without fortune and respect without equity. In Section 2, we'll reveal his behind-the-scenes battles for royalty rights, his advocacy for Native representation, and the personal toll of a lifetime playing the faithful sidekick. By the early 1960s, as reruns of The Lone Ranger flooded living rooms around the globe, Jay Silverheels quietly discovered the gulf between public acclaim and private reward. Every spring, when the studio issued royalty statements for repeat airings, he found a flat rate that barely covered his agent's commission. His co-star Clayton Moore earned a modest pension, but Silverheels saw nothing. He approached Desilu's executive offices in Burbank, suit pressed, feather tucked into his breast pocket, and asked to renegotiate his contract. He was told politely that televised syndication was still experimental, and that sidekick actors traditionally did not share in profits once initial production costs were recouped. Disillusioned but undeterred, he retained a young entertainment lawyer, planting the seeds of what would become a 2-decade campaign for residual equity that in Hollywood's back rooms and union halls. Silverheels built alliances with fellow contract players who'd been burned by one-time fees and silent paycheck roles. He joined SAG's television negotiating committee, lobbying for a minimum residual standard for actors in supporting roles. He pored over old contracts, tracing payment provisions in early talkies and live TV dramas. At meetings, he argued that if the studio keeps our images on screen, we own a piece of that success. More seasoned board members, white men whose families had enjoyed multi-generation studio ties, listened politely while deflecting his proposals as premature or industry risk. But Silverheels persisted. He delivered speeches about fair pay, invoking the Medicine Game's reciprocity principle. Those who give their labor deserve a share of the bounty. Behind those closed doors, he also faced hostility. Some producers grumbled that nothing tarnishes a cowboy picture like a lawsuit from the Indian. At one point, a studio manager mailed him a backhanded Christmas card bearing a cartoon of Tonto chasing profit with a spear, signed "Happy Holidays, your friend, Howard." Silverheels slipped that card into a scrapbook alongside newspaper clippings, a private chronicle of the prejudice he encountered. Despite the slights, he pressed on, drafting white paper position statements for SAG that compared share of profits models in music publishing, where songwriters and performers had long enjoyed residual streams, with the absence of such models in television. By 1965, the union agreed to include a pilot residual clause that applied to all credited performers. The limited, it marked the first concrete gain from Silverheels' efforts. His pursuit of fair compensation was mirrored by a broader campaign to shift Hollywood's depiction of Native people. Tired of seeing his culture flattened into headdresses and broken English buffoonery, Silverheels began advising screenwriters and costume designers on authentic dress and speech patterns. He insisted that his character drop the faux Indian trope of "me want candy" and adhere to the dignity of his Mohawk heritage. On set, he granted morning council circles with dialogue coaches, urging them to research real tribal languages rather than parrot cliches. Desilu allowed some changes. Tonto's routines began to include silent moments of reflection, and the scripts sometimes acknowledged that he had a family and traditions back home. But the deeper stereotypes proved harder to uproot. Studios still slotted Native roles as either bloodthirsty villains or faithful aides, rarely in between. Off-camera, he accepted paid engagements as a cultural consultant for television anthologies that wanted to depict Plains tribes or Iroquois diplomacy accurately. One high-profile episode of Wagon Train detailing a fictitious treaty with Sioux elders paid him $5,000 and credited him as technical advisor, Native American Affairs. He negotiated a clause ensuring his name appeared in the on-screen credits rather than buried in fine print. That credit was a small triumph, more symbolic than financial, but it signaled that Silverheels could leverage his fame to reshape the narrative around Indigenous peoples. In a handful of westerns and dramas, audiences began seeing Native characters portrayed with more nuance. Parents mourning the loss of land, warriors grappling with forced assimilation, healers offering counsel to settlers. Though these portrayals were still rare, Silverheels knew that every seed of authenticity planted might bloom in another writer's mind decades later. Yet advocacy exacted a toll. On weekend press tours, he fielded the same questions about how does it feel to ride the Lone Ranger's horse, while struggling to cover medical bills for injuries sustained performing stunts. He financed his legal challenges against royalty waivers with advances from friends. Vince Edwards lent him $2 $501 month for litigation fees. Creating personal debt he repaid only by selling off a plot of farmland he'd purchased outside Los Angeles. At home, far from the studio glamour, his wife Bobby logged extra hours as a seamstress to help cover household expenses. Their modest bungalow near Hollywood Boulevard echoed with the creak of typewriters as Silverheels drafted letters to union delegates late into the night, fighting battles that often felt Sisyphean. His health began to falter in the late 1960s. Decades of horse stunts in heavy buckskins had inflamed chronic knee pain, and recurring respiratory infections were blamed on endless days under studio lights without sufficient breaks. On one particularly grueling night shoot, he collapsed between takes, drenched in sweat and wearing buckskins that weighed him down. A studio medic diagnosed him with early-stage arthritis, an occupational hazard, he noted wryly. Silverheels considered filing a workers' compensation claim, but feared being blacklisted. He opted for painkillers and braved the sets until a rounded monthly check landed. His endurance bought at the price of his body's resilience. By the time The Lone Ranger ended in 1957, and even as new westerns rose and faded, Silverheels found himself increasingly cast in bit parts. He appeared in recurring cameo roles as Indian Chief on Cheyenne and Bonanza, but remained uncredited from 1960 onward. Younger Native actors, aspiring Mohicans and Cree hopefuls, arrived on sets while he watched from the fringes. Typecasting had trapped him. To break free would require shedding his feathered regalia, surrendering the only role that had given him nationwide recognition. He tried in the early 1970s, enrolling in workshops at the Actors Studio to tackle dramatic roles as descendants of settlers or jazz musicians. Yet casting directors still saw only Tonto's painted face, and auditions ended with polite thank yous, but no callbacks to IT home. The pattern of struggle weighed on his spirit. The small savings he'd tucked away for his children, 3 sons and a daughter. Eroded as medical costs soared, and the royalties he'd fought for amounted to a fraction of studio profits. Bobby took on sewing contracts for period costumes on low-budget films. Their daughter Laurel remembers stitching extra layers of buckskin to earn pocket money. Family vacations dwindled. The once proud lacrosse star turned consultant on cultural matters needed financial assistance from tribal grants just to attend a Six Nations reunion. Silverheels' pride hurt more than his failing knees. Yet in that adversity, he found renewed purpose. In 1975, he co-founded the Indian Actors Guild, a caucus aimed at securing better training and employment conditions for Native performers. They negotiated collective contracts that guaranteed speaking roles and on-screen credits for tribal extras in feature films. For the first time, set supervisors had to regard the presence of Indigenous actors not as background decoration, but as skilled professionals deserving recognition. Hollywood studios bristled at the added complexity, but union pressure and negative press coverage, sparked by Native journalists, forced grudging compliance. Silverheels chaired the Guild's first national conference in Los Angeles, donning a tailored suit rather than his buckskin. Each fabric fold a testament to the distance he'd traveled from humble beginnings. In those gatherings, he mentored a new generation. Michael Greyeyes, Tonto Cardinal, Graham Greene. He taught them to negotiate credit lines, to push for script revisions, to demand equitable payments for ancillary markets. He shared the cautionary tale of his own contract battles and showed them his tattered SAG membership card, embossed with faded letters. Those young actors later credited Silverheels with opening doors that once slammed shut. Their success in mainstream films and television series decades later stood as a testament to the groundwork he'd laid when no one outside his community cared to lend an ear. Though he never secured full parity in royalties or residuals, Silverheels took solace in the enduring impression of his work. He witnessed fans in the 1980s chanting "Kumo Sabi" at Western conventions, not as a caricature, but as a tribute to his trailblazing presence. He received honorary tribal ceremonies, blanket-robed in Maori gatherings in New Zealand, and salved by standing ovations in Berlin cinephile screenings. His children, now grown and with families of their own, showed him newspaper clippings about Indigenous casting calls that ran, "We want authentic representation," just like Jay Silverheels once demanded. In the mirror, he saw not the struggling sidekick, but a man whose quiet tenacity had shifted the arc of representation in an entire industry. As Section 2 reaches its close, we glimpse Jay Silverheels not just as Tonto, but as a tireless advocate who wrestled with Hollywood's inequities. He courted studio executives for royalty shares, taught young actors to assert their rights, and endured personal hardship to expand opportunities for Native performers. In Section 3, we'll explore the final years of his life, his financial struggles and retirement, the ceremonies that honored his legacy, and the enduring impact he left on screen and off. In his later years, Jay Silverheels faced both the rewards and the regrets of a life lived on screen yet uncompensated off it. By the mid-1970s, residual checks were minimal, and medical bills for his aching knees and recurrent respiratory infections mounted. He sold the small Ojai bungalow he'd owned since the 1950s and moved with Bobby into a modest 2-bedroom Laurel Canyon apartment, sacrificing space for affordability. His leather-bound collection of Lone Ranger scripts, once a prized archive, went to auction, fetching a few $100s each. He joked to friends that he'd become the only cast member with less money the longer the show ran. Yet his spirit remained unbowed. He spent mornings tending a rooftop vegetable garden, harvesting tomatoes and chiles to share with neighbors. With proceeds from occasional autograph sessions at Western memorabilia fairs, where enthusiasts paid $25 for a signed photo, he covered rent and medical copays. Those same collectors often pleaded with him to tell behind-the-scenes stories. He obliged with warmth, recounting Clayton Moore's ad-libs and Desilu's impromptu costume changes. Fans left with smiles, unaware that each autograph sale underwrote another physical therapy session. Recognition came in quieter forms, too. In 1976, the American Indian Film Festival in San Francisco honored him with a Lifetime Achievement Award. He limped onto the stage in a tailored blazer instead of his buckskin, greeted by a standing ovation from Indigenous actors, filmmakers, and activists he'd mentored decades earlier. In his acceptance speech, he reflected on the long road from reservation to Hollywood backlit, urging young artists to keep your identity at the heart of your craft. That evening, after the gala, he returned home with a modest cash honorarium, but richer in the affirmation that his advocacy had begun to bear fruit. A year later, in 1977, Jay suffered a severe bout of pneumonia. Hospitalized for 3 weeks, he underwent intensive care, oxygen therapy, intravenous antibiotics, and rounds of physical therapy to rebuild stamina. Nurses recalled his gentle humor, quipping with attendants about playing dead on camera long before and insisting on signing every form with a flourish of Tonto beneath his signature. Upon release, he faced months of homebound recovery, during which Bobby nursed him while updating manuscripts for the Indian Actors Guild. Despite fragile health, his determination to improve conditions for Native performers never wavered. In the early 1980s, a wave of nostalgia for classic television led to offers for cameo reprises. Producers of a short-lived 1983 Lone Ranger TV special invited Clayton Moore and Jay Silverheels to appear together once more. Lacking contractual residuals, Silverheels was paid a flat fee of $2,000, more than he'd ever earned for a single episode in the 1950s, yet scarcely enough to offset production of his traditional buckskin regalia. The reunion special aired to middling ratings, but for Jay, it was a bittersweet moment. He and Moore shared one final ride down the dusty trail, each actor's face haggard in the fading camera light. That same year, Bobby passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Jay, then 71, mourned her deeply. He moved in with his son Ted and daughter Laurel in British Columbia, where air was cleaner and family support closer. In Vancouver, Laurel converted the garage into a small studio where Jay recorded centennial projects for First Nations radio and spoke at schools about Mohawk history. Students listened spellbound as he recounted his own forced assimilation in residential schools and found in his memoir-like anecdotes a bridge between past injustices and modern identity. In return, communities welcomed him. One town declared Jay Silverheels Day, complete with an eagle feather blessing and communal feast. Despite these local honors, Jay's financial picture remained fragile. He sold the few remaining props, his policeman's badge and ceremonial tomahawk, from the Lone Ranger set. He donated his vintage lacrosse sticks to a Vancouver museum, trading nostalgia for a small stipend that helped buy groceries. Yet he refused charity. Instead, he accepted stipends through formal grants administered by the Indian Actors Guild. They set aside a hardship fund for members who had pioneered representation yet fallen through the industry's safety nets. In 1985, the Guild solicited donations from established stars, one notable contribution from Clint Eastwood, who had grown up loving Westerns and credited Jay for shaping his own early career ambitions. In his final years, Silverheels became a sought-after speaker at universities and cultural centers. He recounted Hollywood's evolution, from studio backlots to the rise of independent Indigenous filmmaking. In 1988, at age 76, he delivered a keynote at UCLA's Department of American Indian Studies, drawing academics and students alike. Though his voice was frail, his convictions rang clear. He called for screenwriters to consult Indigenous elders, for directors to cast Native actors in Native roles, and for audiences to demand authenticity over stereotype. Afterward, attendees gathered a petition supporting his proposals, which later circulated among Hollywood producers. His health declined in 1989, with a series of minor strokes that affected his balance and speech. He moved to a care facility near Victoria, British Columbia, under his daughter's guardianship. Staff recall that despite physical limitations, Jay insisted on wearing a single eagle feather in his lapel every day, a tribute to the warrior spirit he'd embodied as Tonto. In lucid moments, he penned a memoir manuscript, Tonto's Tale, blending personal reflections with industry memoir and Mohawk oral history. Though the memoir remained unpublished at his death, the draft circulated among scholars and sparked renewed interest in Indigenous cinema studies. On March 5, 1989, Jay Silverheels passed away peacefully in his sleep at 76. His funeral service combined Mohawk rites, smudging ceremonies, traditional chants, eagle drum singing, with a screening of Lone Ranger episodes. Over 200 mourners attended, from tribal chiefs to Hollywood stuntmen. Clayton Moore sent flowers with a note, "Forever my fearless friend." Jay was interred on Six Nations land in Ontario, next to his mother's grave. His tombstone, carved with the image of a racquetball-style lacrosse stick, bore the epitaph, "Ialis, Kimo Sabe, forever free." In the decades since his passing, Silverheels' legacy has flourished in unexpected ways. Academic conferences on Indigenous media cite his early advocacy as foundational. In 2002, the Jay Silverheels Award was established, honoring outstanding Native performances in film and television. Recipients include Wesley Snipes, Irene Bedard, and Graham Greene, actors who trace a lineage back to Jay's pioneering work. In 2015, the Ontario Provincial Film Commission funded the restoration of the Lone Ranger pilot reel, preserving his performance in high-definition archives. Today, Jay Silverheels stands as more than Tonto. He is recognized as a cultural trailblazer who navigated Hollywood's marginalization to lay groundwork for authentic Indigenous storytelling. His story underscores the duality of fame's spotlight and society's blind spots. While silver screens immortalized his painted visage, studio balance sheets erased his contributions. His dogged fight for residuals, credit, and representation echoes in every modern contract that secures on-screen credit and residuals for supporting artists. As viewers revisit Lone Ranger reruns on streaming platforms, they may hear only a stylized Kimo Sabe and see a sidekick riding in shadow. Yet beyond the buffed boots and painted cheek, they should glimpse the silhouette of Jay Silverheels, the Mohawk boy turned lacrosse champion, the silver-heeled sprinter turned screen legend, the imposing presence who never stopped demanding dignity for his people. That dual life, Tonto to millions, Harold Smith to the nations, reminds us that the true frontier Jay Silverheels traversed was not the wild west of frontier towns, but the tangled terrain of prejudice and profit, where he rode toward equity with courage and grace.